So, hello everyone, it's lovely to be here, and thank you very much for having me here at B-Sides Dublin. I'll start with a quick introduction of myself. I am Miłosz. If you're looking for a pronunciation guide, what I usually go with is me no dirty, Miłosz. You've got it. If you prefer a more formal approach, here's the International Phonetic Alphabet spelling of my first name, Miłosz. I'm not going to bore you with my last name. In my past life, I did a fair amount of work at university. Most of it was teaching. There was a little bit of incidental IT stuff as well, but I've spent about 6 years teaching computer science and cybersecurity at a UK university. In my current life, I am more focused on mobile application pen testing and mobile device pen testing. I currently lead the mobile security team at WithSecure. Recently, I got a little bit more into mobile application management setups, but that's kind of neither here nor there. And I am the friend of the local Basingstoke Ducks, as seen in the photograph. Today's talk is not going to be mobile security, because I don't want to bore you guys with my everyday work. Instead, we will be talking about a few days of investigating a suspected incident at a UK higher education institution. And the goals for this talk are kind of to, first and foremost, entertain you a little bit, let loose a little bit of steam, but also cover the kind of basic technical understanding of how keyboards actually function. That's going to be mostly USB keyboards and a little bit of wireless keyboards. And the process of actually figuring things out. So you're presented with a situation you know nothing about, and you kind of go, well, now what? A lot of technical talks focus so much on sort of, going, oh yeah, and here's what we found out. Not many of them go into here's how we found out. So I'll try to cover that at a slightly higher level without delving too much into the technicalities and kind of much more focusing on that, I started with this assumption and then went on to reach something that resembles a conclusion. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of how I started this talk, this was my level of experience when I started. And this is my current level of experience with the subject. So, in case anyone tries to tell you that I'm an expert, no, I'm a baby with a few tools. Right, let's talk about keyboards. So, the problem statement of the keyboard is people want to be able to type. That presumably is not news to anyone. The way this used to work a long, long time ago is you would either have a parallel or serial device connected to your computer, and that would send an interrupt to the actual machine, and then the machine would respond. So it was the actual keyboard's job to send a signal to the computer to say, hey, a key has been pressed or a key has been picked up. This still has a religious following among some gamers because there is a instant response from the keyboard. So the moment you press a button, that's when the interrupt goes to your operating system, and it's your operating system's problem to do something with it from that point on. And the sort of more recent, rather than having like a standard parallel or serial port, is the PS2 port, which you can see over there. You've probably seen that on modern PCs still, and the main reason for that is legacy support and, honestly, gamers. But most of the world has moved on to USB keyboards, which work quite differently. So they rely on a standard known as the Human Interface Device class. And basically what USB HID does is it provides a list of standardized functionality that is being used by the USB controller to identify when a key has been pressed, a mouse has been moved, a button on a controller has been pressed, that kind of stuff. So whenever you have a device that a human uses to interact with a computer in a fairly standard way, that's probably using USB HID if it is a USB device. If it is a Bluetooth device, it's actually the same protocol. It's just been ported over to Bluetooth. The Bluetooth documentation doesn't actually tell you anything about HID. It just says, go read the USB documentation. So yeah, that covers mice, keyboards, game controllers, presentation clickers, actually, like if I had one of the switchy, slidey things. That is also a USB HID device. And it actually usually just identifies itself as either a keyboard or a mouse. The good news of having everything so standardized and simple is that you can plug in any keyboard, any mouse into a computer. It instantly knows what to do with it, and it will just work. The bad news is that you can plug in anything that says it's a keyboard or mouse, and it will act as one. So this leads us to a situation where that simplicity kind of produces a potential side effect of, either having a device in the middle that understands HID and it can read what the keyboard is saying, does something else with it, but also sends it to the machine. So if you had physical access, you could put something in between and get your keystrokes that way. But also it means that the device that you're plugging in as a keyboard doesn't actually have to be physically a keyboard. It can be just about anything. And that is generally classified as BadUSB devices. So again, because there isn't really much in terms of security when it comes to USB HID devices identifying themselves, you just end up with anything that says is a keyboard is now a keyboard. You plug something in and it just goes, hey, I'm going to be sending you keystrokes now. And the OS is like, okay. There are a few notable exceptions to that, but they're mostly accidental. I think the main exception I can think of is macOS. If you plug in a keyboard to a Mac device, it will first ask you to help it identify what layout the keyboard is. And as a result, it will not immediately be accepting keystrokes because it will be waiting for you to clarify that first. So it asks you like, is the enter key shaped like this, or is it more of a rectangle? And that's the only reason why, coincidentally, it then goes, you've plugged in a keyboard. What do you want to do with it? And someone can go, no, I didn't. Otherwise, on Windows, pretty much as a matter of course, on most Linux distributions, you've plugged in a keyboard, you can type straight away. And you can plug in another device and type straight away. So that brings us to devices like the USB rubber ducky and similar devices. So that is a board that you can preset with a set of keystrokes with a script that basically says, the moment this has been plugged into a computer, it will start typing those things. I have a Flipper Zero that has a very similar functionality. And when I was playing with it, I definitely didn't have a slight problem when I ended up posting notepad.exe on Slack. So I had a very simple script that was pressing Windows R to open the run menu, types in notepad.exe and presses enter. The first time I tried it, it did not press Windows R. It just posted on Slack. Great. But you get the idea. It's a device that is blatantly not a keyboard, acting as one. And what it can do is it can type much faster than I could possibly hope. You can also set them to act on a delay. So if you sneak in, find someone's workstations, plug something like that in and say, in about half an hour, open up a terminal and spawn a reverse shell. That's a reasonably possible path of attack. So with all that in mind, things are not great, but they're not terrible. I mean, realistically, for any of those attacks, you need to have physical access to a workstation. That's a pretty hefty requirement. You need to have access to a USB port. That is not always going to be a case with your targets. You might be looking at something like an ATM where everything is hopefully locked away and hopefully not using the default key. But on the flip side, there is a little bit of potential for mischief. So you can plug something in that's like an innocuous looking USB device. Again, going back to these two. So you've got the Flipper Zero as an example. You've got the classic USB rubber ducky that just looks like a USB stick. You also can find those in cables. So there are people who make what looks like a USB extension cable, but actually contains something resembling a rubber ducky inside of it. So that could be a nice way to kind of get something that isn't going to catch attention visually. And also, this is all very handy if your target doesn't even have a keyboard. So if you have some sort of headless machine that isn't supposed to be interacted with on a daily basis, but suddenly, you've plugged in your rubber ducky and it just kind of acts as a keyboard very quickly. Now, with all of that, with it all being quite physical access required, I was wondering whether we could take this slightly further. So maybe it doesn't have to rely on a pre-written script like a rubber ducky does. Maybe it's something that we could feasibly feed information to remotely. So I would have some way of kind of, throwing information at it from slightly farther away or very far away, and then that would type as I type. So here's my hypothetical solution. We have a target machine. Let's say it's a laptop. We have something that is clearly not a keyboard. It's some small USB dongle. Nobody's going to tell me that that's a keyboard. And then you've got your source of keystrokes, which is communicating with that dongle via radio frequency. An interesting way of expanding the physical attack, because now you can move away maybe 100 meters. Maybe you're no longer in sight of your victim, but you can type on the computer interactively. The eagle-eyed amongst you might have realized that that's a wireless keyboard. That covers the basic introduction to keyboards and basically gives you the base level of knowledge required for my story. So a few disclaimers on the story. It is loosely based on facts, but I will have to lie to you about 40% of the time. The bits that matter are there, and they are true. But yeah, a few details here and there, including the institution itself, probably not so much. So let's introduce our institution. The University of something, and I will probably refer to them as UOS for the rest of this talk, is located somewhere in the Caribbean. It's a fairly standard educational institution, so what it's going to have is, mostly fairly large lecture theaters, maybe about this size, maybe a little bit larger, with a not dissimilar IT AV setup. And for the sake of the story, I'm there doing a side job, helping with a little bit of IT. So your standard lecture room might look something like this. This is from a real institution, but it is not from the institution in question. What you will end up with usually is, the audience, you guys. But also you'll have a podium or lectern, which will be slightly more complex than what we have here. So a lot of the time it will have an actual desktop PC, with the idea being that because there's many lecturers kind of coming in and out, they probably want to just go in, log into their account on the same machine. Their slides are already on there and they can just kind of get going instead of having to fiddle about with laptops. So although BYOD laptops, bring your own device laptops, are absolutely supported, desktops are a very, very popular option because it just provides you with that convenience of, I've walked in, right, grab the keyboard, type in my password, I'm in. They are relatively tamper-proof. They kind of have to be because they've got something like 40,000 euros worth of equipment in them that you would very happily steal if you had the opportunity to. They aren't really secure enough to withstand like proper destruction. So if someone took a sledgehammer to them, yeah, they're going to get in and they're going to walk away with stuff. But they are at least going to stop a well-intentioned user from shooting themselves in the foot. So if someone decides, I want to plug something in the back, they shouldn't be able to easily do that. Right. Now you know the institution and you know why I'm there. I'm helping out with a little bit of IT. At some point, we start to get some strange IT tickets from our users. So UOS starts getting a decent number of tickets, maybe 10 or so, saying, in this lecture theater, the wireless keyboard ran out of battery, it needs replacing. That sounds pretty amateurish. You'd think you'd have someone going around and making sure that those are in a decent state. You think you wouldn't wait for them to completely run out of battery and throw someone's lecture off. So why did this happen? Because we don't have wireless keyboards in those rooms. That's kind of the whole point. Because there is an added risk of, keyboard going out of commission mid-lecture or something like that, what we go with is wired keyboards, specifically to prevent that. So why are we getting tickets saying that there's wireless keyboards that have run out of batteries in rooms that don't have them? Right, well, the way to find out is to go to an affected room. So we go in there and we try to figure out, well, what the hell is actually happening? Why, this doesn't click. We walk into a room, we find out the wired keyboard, sure enough, is not there. And sure enough, there is a wireless keyboard on the podium, just chilling. We didn't put it there. We don't know who did. Looking further, we find that, if you go to the back of the PC, you trace all the USB cables. Of course, it is a tangled mess in there, but we eventually find the right one, and it goes to nothing. So someone walked in with, if we're generous, wire snips, if we're realistic, scissors, snipped off the cable, hoiked the wired keyboard, put in a wireless keyboard, plugged in the dongle into the front of the machine because you've got a couple of USB ports in there, and left. What? Okay, well, that doesn't help, but at least we know what happened. We don't know why it happened. So we start thinking, okay, well, ultimately this must be harmless, right? You just replace the keyboard and forget about it. It's only happened a few times. Whatever. No, because this keeps happening. So we've done a few. We didn't think much of it at the time. The keyboards keep showing up in more and more rooms. Nobody knows why. And at this point, originally we weren't aware of this problem. Now we're watching quite actively and we're spotting them sort of the day they appear. No idea what's going on. And here's the keyboard, the culprit, the Advent keyboard. So let's try and figure out why this is happening. So what we didn't want to do is just assume, oh, it's a cyber attack, because it doesn't sound like one, at least initially. So we started going through potential hypotheses. Yeah, sure, it could be a security issue. We're leaving that as final option. The fact that it's in this talk kind of spoils it, but, pretend you don't know that. So first hypothesis, well, maybe someone in IT is doing this, and we just don't know. Left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Could feasibly happen. Alternative, maybe they wanted to steal the wired keyboards. Maybe there is a user who is, feeling a little bit rogue and feeling a little bit self-righteous. They really don't like wired keyboards. They want wireless keyboards, so they're just replacing them themselves. Maybe someone's playing a prank on us. Or, maybe there is something going on to do with security. So, going back to those, is it someone in IT? Well, as far as we can tell, no. And at this point, we've gone to the point of asking just about anyone who it could be. Anyone who has access to those benches. It also doesn't match the idea of just cutting the USB cable. If you're a legitimate employee, you're just going to get to the back of the machine and unplug it like a normal human. Maybe they wanted to steal the wired keyboards. Okay, fine. You've cut the USB cable. You can solder on a new USB port, but, that's a bit of a faff. But we are talking about what is probably the cheapest keyboards available to man. We are talking keyboards like if you buy a Dell desktop as a business, they're going to send you a mouse and a keyboard with it. And those normally go into a storage room somewhere in the back because who needs that many keyboards and mice? So that's what's getting deployed because it is already there. So I don't know. Would someone want to steal them? Probably not. Maybe someone really hates wired keyboards, wants to replace them, but then why wouldn't you carry the one wireless keyboard with you? Go into the room, go, oh, I hate this thing, put it to the side, plug in your keyboard, use it, and then take it back with you. So that doesn't really work out. Is it just a prank? I mean, maybe, but at this point, we've collected, and I mean collected, so they are in our room, about 10 keyboards. So it's not that someone is, putting in the same keyboard in and out. No, we've been taking them back, and they've been reappearing. So someone is spending money on this. Not huge amounts of money, but maybe more than like a single student trying to have a laugh. Because, I mean, if you look at 10 keyboards, that's, 20 quid. Let's say you're looking at about £200. That's hopefully outside of the budget of a usual prank. Okay, that brings us back to the security issue. Not what we want to assume, but okay, maybe. It is a university. There is value in stolen credentials. To elaborate, if you're a student and if you've stolen a lecturer's credentials, you probably have access to marks, and you probably have edit access to marks. You might have access to exam papers that haven't yet been released. You might have access to research if you are a little bit more maliciously inclined. And on top of that, the institution in question does have MFA with an asterisk. And as long as you know what that asterisk is, then MFA is not really that big of a problem. It still sounds contrived, but that's the best theory we have at this point, is that someone is doing something with those keyboards to do something. Inject keys, sniff keys, who knows? Okay, well, we've got 10 keyboards in the back room. Let's investigate them. So step one is take the keyboard apart and find, whatever modification has been made to the keyboard to obviously make it malicious. Nothing there. It's a normal keyboard. It clearly has never been opened. It clearly hasn't been modified. If it has been modified, it's been modified very well. So that's probably not it. Okay, well, we've checked the keyboard. Let's check the dongle. The dongle is very small. There isn't really disassembly to speak of other than violently hitting it until it opens up. So that's what we do. We look around again. Well, point A, how do you open this thing to modify it? You don't. We just tried. Point B, again, there is nothing in there. It just looks like your very, very standard USB dongle with the usual chip and nothing special in there that could justify any worries. Okay, fine. Grab the entire PC out of a room that's been affected by this, send that to IT security, be like, hey, can you look at this? This is what we're thinking might be the problem. Can you find anything? Of course they can't. It's a normal PC with a normal keyboard dongle in it and a cut USB cable at the back. The cut USB cable is suspicious, but it doesn't inherently present any risks. Nothing has changed as far as the software on the machine. Nothing has changed as far as the hardware on the machine other than the presence of a USB dongle in the front. So we still don't really have that much luck. So this is where we go to the IT special tactic of just frantically Googling things until something starts making sense. And this step, I've presented it as a single bullet point. That's a few days of just going, keyboard hack, what? Help. Why is keyboard in room? Keyboard appearing mysteriously, previous incidents. And very little is coming back. This isn't something that people do every day. You don't normally go into an organization of this size and suddenly start seeing random keyboards appearing. That just isn't a thing. Until eventually we run into a potential lead. And it is kind of by presuming in advance that there is something wrong with those keyboards. That means that they wouldn't require a modification. So we kind of went from assumption to assumption to assumption until we went, well, if the keyboard hasn't been modified, and if we assume that they are being deployed there for malicious reasons, then the keyboard itself must be a problem in some way. And by looking into those possibilities, we eventually found research which has been boisterously titled KeySniffer, which boils down to Bastille research doing a little bit of reverse engineering on a bunch of wireless keyboards and finding out that quite a few of them are trivial to intercept. So they do RF communication, as I kind of showed you before in my hacky device joke. And essentially what they do is they don't encrypt that communication at all, and they follow a communication scheme that is really quite simple to reverse engineer and understand. So from that perspective, you get yourself a decent receiver, you tune it to listen on the same frequency, you need to understand a little bit about what the actual protocol is, but from that point on, you can start listening for keystrokes, and potentially they hint that you might also be able to inject keystrokes by sending packets, again, following the well-known format. There have been similar previous vulnerabilities. Mousejack is one that's been very well known. But the difference between Mousejack and KeySniffer is that KeySniffer is KeySniffer affected devices are very, very promiscuous in advertising that they exist. So with Mousejack, which was a very similar specification, again, unencrypted RF, you would only be able to kind of identify that there is a device that's vulnerable in your vicinity if you were actively getting keystrokes from it. But nothing would happen if the keyboard was idle. The difference with KeySniffer is that the dongles identified in that round of research pretty much constantly, if they're powered on, say, "Hi, I'm a dongle. Hi, I'm a dongle," at very high speeds. So even if the keyboard is just chilling on a PC that's powered on and nobody's using it, if you're within range, you are going to be able to detect that it exists. So yeah, theoretically, if you were aiming to target something like that, you can probably confirm that there is an affected keyboard in your operational range long before you actually launch your attack. If you wanted to play with this, the cost of entry is really quite low. You either need something like a Crazy Radio dongle, which is just an open project radio that you can flash pretty much any firmware you want onto, which will run you about 30 to 40 euros. Or you can use a Logitech unifying receiver, which chances are you have 5 of in a drawer somewhere. And if you don't, it is about 15 to 20 euros. It uses the exact same chip as the Crazy Radio, the same chip, not cheap, although it is also cheap. And it is surprisingly equally flashable. So the only difference is that, on the Crazy Radio dongle, you get a nice amplified antenna. On the Logitech unifying receiver, you don't. It's a little bit smaller, but it'll get you within decent range. So first things first, is the keyboard that we found, or the 9 of them that remain and are not destroyed, vulnerable? So KeySniffer very helpfully present us with a list of devices that they have confirmed this on. Our device is not one of them, which makes me sad. However, they do present the exact same USB ID as multiple of the affected devices. So we might be onto something still. So sure enough, it isn't the exact model, but if you look at, I'm going to walk right in front of the projector, that's good. If you look at these, That is USB VID 062A and PID 4101, which should be a unique identifier of a device. Now, the fact that it spans multiple devices from multiple brands tells you a little bit about how unique they are, but that's neither here nor there. These are probably the same dongles, or at least very, very close. Okay, well, then let's test it. So on the KeySniffer GitHub repo, you get a handy tool to detect affected devices. And basically what it does is it listens out to that, hey, I'm a dongle, signal that those dongles send out all the time. And sure enough, running that, it detects our keyboard. So obviously we've cracked the case, talk's over, thank you. And now we also have a little bit of extra information because they hopefully tell us that these dongles are known as Mozart dongles. That refers to a semiconductor company, which, among other things, makes a lot of white label wireless keyboards. Who would have thought? So we're clearly finally getting somewhere. We now just need to, prove the point by actually listening to some keystrokes, and we've got our case. We can present it to everyone and be like, hey, that works. So Bastille didn't just give us a working offensive tool to actually sniff keystrokes. I wonder why they didn't, but okay. But they did run a DEF CON talk in which they explained the entire protocol in excruciating detail. Without going over the entire paper, because, it is quite long, the key kind of point for us is the actual definition of the packet. So we've got the exact bytes, what order they appear on, and what they actually say. And we've got a couple of examples for A key down and A key up. Brilliant. So we have a script that finds those keyboards, and that sets out a lot of the coding for us because it already sets up the radio the way we want it. It already finds the right channel and ID of the keyword affected. So we just need to modify it very slightly to, let's say, listen for the key A. I'm working on a POC here. I'm not trying to write an entire sniffer for now. So, this will be done in no time, but no, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, fine. Let's take a step back. So instead of trying to identify an A press, I am just going to dump every single thing that I'm getting from that keyboard on radio communication and see if any of them look like the actual packets that were defined in the paper. No, not really. They don't make sense. They aren't always of the right length. In fact, most of the time they aren't of the right length. They kind of start right, but there's nothing there. And again, this is several days of trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. The reason I'm showing it like this is because this is my state of knowledge of it. It is binary garbage as far as I can tell. And the keyboard is communicating on multiple channels, which it's not supposed to be doing. None of this is right. Okay. New assumption. Clearly, I've done something fundamentally wrong. Let's see if there is anybody else who has done similar research before. Sure enough, there is. So we've got Romain Kerr's Mirage, which is basically a suite of different attacks on Bluetooth and wireless protocols, kind of trying to be a Metasploit type thing, but for those very, very specific attack paths. And with a logo like that, we're definitely hacking. So cool, I've got Mirage. This is going to be easy now, right? No. I'm still not seeing anything. And the implementation in Mirage, I went into the source code, looks very similar to what I was writing, and people have largely been saying that it works. So I'm kind of getting okay, I don't think I messed up. I don't think this guy messed up. He really knows his stuff. People are reporting that it works and that it works to this day. Clearly, we're still missing something here. But while we're here and while we have a somewhat mature tool, let's play around with the other modules to do with Mozart. And we find Key Injector, which sounds like fun, and I hadn't thought of actually doing this before. So Key Injector promises you that it will be able to actually send keystrokes into the dongle, thus impersonating a keyboard without you having physical access to it. And that worked. So suddenly I'm able to find my keyboard with the original tool from Bastille. I'm able to set it up with Mirage. So I'm setting up my target, which is the address. I'm setting up my channel, which it's communicating. And then if I start typing, it injects those presses into the keyboard. And I can see that on the other end on another PC that the keyboard dongle is actually plugged into. I've got a quick demo here In the original version of this talk, I did this live. I then realized that to do that, I need half an hour of prep time before the talk, and then it goes wrong anyway. So instead, you're getting a video because there isn't actually that much to see there. But hopefully this will run. Yeah, so I've run the tool to find my Mozart dongle. I then got distracted by a member of the audience, so I believe I'm spending about 30 seconds talking here about the fact that Mirage has a small issue in it where it doesn't respect the system locale. So if you're doing any injection, it assumes that you're typing on a French keyboard, which I am not. So what I had to do is I had to go into Mirage and modify it to at least impersonate the US keyboard layout so that I get something that's at least QWERTY and not AZERTY or whatever it is. Okay, here we go. I stopped being distracted, so I'm loading the Mozart key injector module, typing very slowly because it is a live demo. And then I will set my target and channel, so that's going to be the address and channel that I've got here from the original tool. I should have sped this up, shouldn't I? Oh well. Come on, copy paste. There we go. Come on, did you get distracted again? This is the problem of running talks with small groups of students, is they will ask you questions and I will not refuse to answer. Go on. Okay, we're almost there. I'm scared to click. Maybe this is when I went on the French tangent. There we go. Okay, this from here on, this should just be my slow typing. So channel 30, run. And then what you've got in the top left is my other machine, which is the one I'm actually presenting from. And you can see a very small notepad, which I will in a moment realize that I should have zoomed in on. There you go. So end to end, I was able to plug my actual dongle into one computer, my crazy radio into another computer, set them both up so that I can send from the computer that shouldn't have access to the keyboard to the computer that's actually receiving from the keyboard. And sure enough, I was able to say hello to myself. So we can start drawing some early conclusions. The dongle clearly can receive those packets, so we can't be completely wrong. It must be the right type of dongle. But the keyboard isn't sending them in the format that we're expecting. So we can make some educated guesses. Maybe this specific keyboard has been modified to not have the original issue from the Chinese kind of single label keyboards. We know that other vendors have done so, and we never had proper confirmation that this keyboard would be vulnerable. So maybe it isn't. Perhaps this is easy to reverse. I haven't had the sufficient amount of time to put in to find out. From what I've been looking, it doesn't look like there is an easy way to kind of start. I think you'd probably have to start looking at the actual firmware of the keyboard to see what it's doing behind the scenes. And that means dumping it, reversing it. That's a significant effort. It is possible that the attacker, if this is an attack, which we don't fully know, knows something that we don't. Maybe they have a way of sniffing on this and we just haven't figured it out. But nonetheless, injection is fun and it is potentially malicious because you could potentially be messing with somebody delivering a session. If I had one of those keyboards plugged into my machine, you could potentially be really interrupting me right now by switching my slides back and forth or something like that. And you essentially end up with a remote rubber ducky. And actually, funnily enough, Mirage lets you do that. So you can grab a rubber ducky script and just paste it straight to the Mirage and it will do that. So it really is a remote rubber ducky. We told the University of something what we knew. They agreed that even though we're kind of not completely there, it sounds suspicious enough, we're going to block those devices via group policy and just prevent them from being on those PCs. They never should have been there. Nobody has a legitimate case to put them in there. So blocking a random keyboard should be a non-event unless someone tries to do this. Funnily enough, a few more of those keyboards appeared after we blocked them, and then eventually they gave up. But whoever was doing this was very, very, very persistent. So I guess that's a victory. It's a little bit bittersweet, but, here we are. And at that point, I left campus, and then I lost my dongle. So because I've lost my dongle, I can't take any of the videos you've just seen. I can't produce any evidence, so I guess I will never talk about this to anybody, and this talk never happened. The end. Okay, fine, that doesn't make sense from a chronological perspective. So yes, I did go and buy another one. Sure, so, as we stand, the research is a little bit incomplete. I'd really like to have that sniffing at the end, but it wasn't happening. But even if I want to talk about this partial stuff, I need to get a second keyboard. Okay, fine. Well, I guess I'll go to Curry's, large retailer of random hardware, and buy another one. So that will run me £16. Not too bad. But if I'm going anyway, can I find a keyboard that looks sufficiently questionable to convince me to buy it without any knowledge? Because the problem is, you'll go on Curry's website, you'll look for keyboards. It tells you nothing about what this thing actually does. And I have very specific requirements. I want a keyboard of the right type. I won't get that information. So here are my criteria. Does it look questionable? And can I get it from my local Curry's? There were like two results. One of them gets ruled out because it explicitly says it's encrypted, and that's not what I want. I want a bad keyboard. One looks strangely perfect, and when I say perfect, I mean it just ticks the boxes, It looks cheap. It's not very expensive, but I know nothing about it. Does it use the right protocol? Will it be relevant at all? It sounds like a good idea to just buy it and find out, right? So I did it. Here it is. So we go through the motions, we plug it into my actual PC and try and find out a little bit about it. Now, you might remember this VID and PID. They match exactly what we've seen on the previous keyboards affected. So that sounds like we might actually got somewhere there. Okay, well, then let's try and actually, run the Bastille detection tool and see if it identifies itself as a keyboard that's potentially affected. Sure enough, it does. Well, let's take it one step further and run Mirage and try to run the keylogger script. Sure enough, it does. So, at least for this random unrelated keyboard, it is working. And we now know that this is an attack that actually could happen. And if our attacker bought this keyboard from Curry's instead of that keyboard from Curry's, they would quite potentially be, quite successful. Again, we don't know if they were successful, and we don't know that they were an attacker. These are assumptions, but my kind of working assumption, because we haven't then seen anything bad happen, is that they were probably trying to do this, and they probably failed for the same reason that we did. So it may have just been that they were unlucky in their choice of keyboard. But pure speculation. Do quote me on it if you want to, but with, big asterisks. So anyway, let's have a look at the demo. And by the way, this is what I was telling you about things maybe not going entirely to plan. I couldn't be bothered to pretend that these Python dumps didn't happen. So, they're here, but after a few hopeless Python crashes and God knows what's happening, unplugging and replugging the crazy radio and reflashing it, eventually it ran. So hopefully this is the successful run where I run the detection tool again. And I think this is attempt number 5 when it suddenly finds it and we go like, okay, cool, right, let's do this. So then we get Mirage started. Come on. Note to self, make those faster. I'll skip ahead. Is that better? No, that reset it. Okay, well, apparently I can't click on these. That's okay, this is like slide n-2, so we're going to make it anyway. Yeah, so we found the device, and then I'll run Mirage, I'll run a keylogger, and this time I'll be doing the same exercise but in reverse. So I will be typing on the real keyboard in Notepad, and my hope is to see it here in my shell. One thing that you will notice when I actually get to it is that it doesn't handle multiple keystrokes of the same key very well. So I think I've typed in something like hello in there, and it will come as HELO, because it tries to handle debouncing on a keyboard that it doesn't have much knowledge of. So it just assumes that if it ever gets 2 keys in a row, then it's 1 key. You could probably write something better, but again, this is meant to be a POC. And also, if you were trying to sniff like a password, if you have a little bit of possibility of there being multiple key presses, you can probably infer it from there anyway. So that's kind of already good enough. There we go. So I typed A as my test. I got very excited because it actually worked. Backspaced. And then I'm going to try. I think it's a hello that's coming. Yeah. But what you see on the shell is caps lock has been pressed and an HE_LO. That's just a consequence of how Miłosz tries to handle things. But you absolutely could do a little bit of analysis and find out that it's been pressed twice, because it would probably be a longer signal than the previous ones. So that lets us update our conclusions a little bit. So the original keyboard was not doing the thing. It's not just me being silly. There needs to be further work to figure out what's up with that. I'm assuming encryption. It could be some form of obfuscation, but it's going to be something of that class. Apparently you can go to Curry's and eyeball a bad keyboard and find one that will do this, which I found very exciting because that was £23 that I may or may not have been seeing. So that's not great. I tried telling Curry's. I never got an email back, so maybe I'll try again, but I'm not expecting an email back. I think this is probably quite true of wireless keyboards in general. I suspect if you looked at a large enough sample, you'd probably find quite a few of them that are like that. Finally, Bastille claims that with a crazy radio, you can sniff from quite a distance, so they suggested 76 meters. I've tried with maybe 50 meters and a couple of walls between me, and sure enough, I was getting it. So that could be that you are a couple of rooms away and you're listening to someone's keystrokes, but you are still within decent proximity. And remember, these advertise themselves very promiscuously. They keep saying, hi, hi, hi. So you could feasibly just walk around and start looking for them. You don't necessarily need to have a target knowingly. And finally, there's a little bit of future work. So I'd like to debug Miłosz. I'd like for it to recognize my keyboard layout and not expect me to type in French. I would like for it to detect duplicate keystrokes a little bit more reliably. I'm not expecting 100%, but maybe a little bit. Figure out what's going on with that Advent keyboard. Probably never going to happen realistically, but I'd like to. And finally, the creator of Miłosz also made Radiosploit, which is insane. It basically abuses a rooted Samsung Galaxy S20, modifies its Bluetooth controller stack so that that Bluetooth controller can act as an injector or sniffer of multiple protocols, including the Mozart protocol. So going back to my idea of you could just walk around and potentially find some keyboards nearby, if that was on your phone, that's becoming quite realistic. So I'd really like to play with that. Anyway, that's it from me. If you want to contact me, why would you? But here you go. My Twitter is @cybermiłosz. My work email is miłosz.gaczkowski@withsecure.com. And if any of you want to play, I think I have all the kit. So if you find me at some point and you just want me to set it up quickly, I absolutely can. Otherwise, I think we might have time for exactly one question. Go on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this case, if you looked at the output that I was getting, I pressed caps lock and then I started typing HELLO. Yeah. Miłosz didn't let me send key combinations. So if I tried holding Shift L, it would just say that Shift has been sent, but it wouldn't kind of act as it's being held. So hypothetically, if you extended it to do key combinations, those would probably register as different, yes. Probably. You'd have to... So the thing with Flipper 0 is that it, by default, listens on sub-gigahertz frequencies. Most of these happen on the 2.4 gigahertz band. So you'd probably need an external board that would receive those signals. But from that point on, yeah, it's just a simple matter of programming. Okay, that's going to be everything from me. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.